I'm 80 years old now. 80 years in a quiet house in Astoria, Queens, that seems smaller than it always was. Not because the walls have closed in, but because the person who filled it isn't here anymore. Marianne left 5 years ago, and long before the day she was gone, I had already lost her in a way that took me far too long to understand. I'm telling you this because understanding something too late carries a weight that no words can bear alone. But I'm going to try. I owe it to her. And in a way, I owe it to myself, too. My name is Robert Callahan. I was born in 1944, the son of a carpenter from upstate New York, and a mother who never needed much to be happy. I grew up learning that a man works, provides, and supports, that talking too much was a sign of weakness, that love is shown through actions, not words. I learned that lesson so well that I carried it into my marriage like a heavy suitcase, never realizing how much it was hurting my back over the years. I met Marianne in 1965 at an industrial components factory right here in Astoria. I was 23, a junior engineer full of ambition, and she was 21, working as a secretary in the administrative department, and she had a way of laughing that made noise in the silence. It sounds impossible, but it was true. You could feel her laugh without even being near her. That laugh found me before I even knew her name. We got married the following year in a simple ceremony, with just a few family members and a lot of happy tears. For the first 10, maybe 15 years, we were close in a way that I only understood the value of after it was gone. We'd sit at the table after dinner, and she'd tell me about her day, about her co-workers, about the book she was reading, about a neighbor who'd said something funny at the grocery store. I'd talk about work, about my projects, about the ideas that excited me. There was a thread between us, a living, warm thread that pulsed every time one word met another in the air of our kitchen. But work got bigger, and I grew bigger within it. By the late 70s, I was a senior engineer. By the early 80s, a department head. And what was a job became an identity. I'd come home with my head full of production problems, personnel issues, deadlines. Marianne would start telling me something, and I'd listen with my ears, but not with the rest of me. I'd be mentally reviewing a spreadsheet, solving a conflict with a supplier, planning for the next day's meeting. When she'd ask, "Are you listening to me?" I'd repeat her last few words as proof. But proof of what? That I could capture sounds. Not that I was truly present. I thought my problems were more urgent. After all, I was supporting the household. I worked for both of us. That was my way of loving, I told myself, and I believed it for far too long. It was in 1995 that something happened that should have changed me completely. I had a colleague at the factory named Dennis. We worked together for 18 years. A quiet, reliable guy, good at what he did. He had a wife, Paula, and 2 daughters. We'd chat on our breaks about baseball, about the bosses, about the day-to-day complaints. One April that year, Dennis didn't show up for work. The next day, he was out again. On Wednesday, Paula called me to say he'd had a major health scare over the weekend. He was 51. It was a close call. When I visited him in the hospital a few weeks later, he was different, slower, more introspective. We talked about simple things at first, and then he said something that hung in the air between us like smoke. He said that Paula had been trying to talk to him for 6 months about her mother's health, and he had never once asked a follow-up question. He thought he was listening, but he wasn't. When he said that, he cried. This 51-year-old man, still frail from his recovery, was crying because he hadn't listened to his own wife. I thought it was the emotional shock of someone who had just faced something so serious. I thought it was a reaction to the scare, the medication, the weight of what he'd been through. I didn't connect it to myself. I didn't see the mirror Dennis was holding up to me without even knowing it. Dennis came back to work 3 months later, but he was a different man. He started leaving promptly at 4:30 p.m. every day, no matter what was going on. Before, he'd stay until 8, 9 at night without a complaint. He stopped asking for overtime. At first I was annoyed by it. I thought he'd lost his commitment, that the scare had softened something in him that needed to be firm. But he worked until he retired with the same competence as always, just with different boundaries. And from what I heard later, Dennis and Paula are still together, living out their 80s side by side, just as they should be. I didn't learn what I should have from Dennis. I kept going as I always had, my head buried in my work, convinced I was doing the right thing by being the provider, the responsible one, the serious man who never failed in his duty. Joel, our son, was born in 1968. When he was little, Marianne would always tell me the funny things he did, his little antics, the things kids say that charm any father. I'd listen while reading the paper, while watching the news, while thinking about anything else. I'd say, "That's nice, interesting, cool," and she would keep telling me. Until, when Joel hit his teens in the 80s, she just stopped bringing me those stories. I started to notice she'd talk more with him directly, or with her sister Linda on the phone. I thought it was natural, that teenage sons create their own worlds, and there isn't as much to tell their father. I didn't understand that I was the one who had taught Marianne over years that I didn't care enough, that my attention was always somewhere else, and she, without any drama, without any loud demands, simply learned not to try. Joel is 57 now. He lives in Charleston, South Carolina, with his second wife. We talk sometimes in short phone calls. He's polite, kind, but there's a distance between us that no phone call can completely bridge. I think sometimes that he learned from Marianne that I'm not someone you can really talk to, and that realization hurts in a way that doesn't have a name. Marianne and I reached retirement in 2007. I expected that with the free time, the conversations would come back, that now, without work to distract me at every moment, I could finally be present in a way I never was. But that's not what happened. We'd be in the same room for hours and barely exchange more than a few necessary words. I'd ask what she wanted for dinner. She'd answer. I'd comment on a news story. She'd nod. That was it. And I thought everything was fine, that this was how mature marriages worked, that the silence between two people was a sign of comfort, not distance. I was completely wrong, and the worst part is that the signs had been all around me for years. I just didn't know how to see what was right in front of my eyes. I remember one Sunday afternoon, I think it was 2009, when Marianne sat on the porch for almost 2 hours just looking at the garden. I walked past her 3 times. The first time, I asked if she wanted some juice. She said, "No, thank you." The second time, I didn't ask anything, just went to get some water for myself. The third time, she was in the exact same position, with that look that went right through the garden without settling on anything. I said, "What's wrong? Is everything okay?" She answered, "I'm just thinking." I said, "All right," and went back inside. I never asked what she was thinking about. I never sat down next to her to share that silence that was begging for company. Today, every time I look at that empty chair on the porch, I wonder what was going through her mind that afternoon. And I know I'll never know, because I never asked. That's the hardest part to carry. Not the big mistakes, not the fights that never happened. It's the small moments that accumulated into decades of chosen silence. Every time I turned my back on a conversation, every time I answered without listening, every time she tried and found a wall where she should have found a person. In 2005, a neighbor named Vivian, who had lived 3 houses down from us for over 20 years, moved out suddenly. She and her husband, Richard, had moved into the neighborhood around the same time we did, back in the early 80s. Marianne and Vivian had a beautiful friendship, the kind built on the slow rhythm of backyard afternoons, shared coffee, and conversations that didn't need a specific topic to last for hours. Richard had retired in 2004, full of plans for travel, for trips postponed by decades of work. But less than a year later, Vivian left, and asked for a divorce. 66 years old, 41 years of life together, and she chose to leave. I remember Marianne telling me about it one night. She was reading a magazine. I was watching the news with the volume low. She said, "Vivian left Richard." I replied, "Wow, that's sad." She was quiet for a moment and then added, in the calm voice of someone who isn't just reporting a fact, she said she'd rather be alone than spend the rest of her days with someone who never really saw her. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and let us know what city you're watching from. Let's continue. I promise this will be the best story you'll ever hear. I mumbled something vague and turned my attention back to the television. I didn't let that sentence sink in. I didn't ask myself if it applied to us. Marianne was telling me something using Vivian's words, but I wasn't equipped to hear what wasn't said directly. She was gently knocking on a door, hoping someone would open it from the inside, and I didn't even notice there was a door there. Years later, carrying the weight of what I'd lost, I understood that she had tried to give me that opening many times, not with yelling, not with dramatic scenes. She tried in a soft, almost quiet way, like someone reaching out a hand in the dark, hoping the other person will reach back. And I never did. In 2010, Linda, Marianne's sister, got sick suddenly. It was too fast, too cruel. 4 months after the diagnosis, she was gone. She was 65. Marianne was shattered inside. In that way, only someone who loses a truly irreplaceable person can understand. The night we said our final goodbye to Linda, we came home and Marianne sat down at the kitchen table. She stayed there, motionless, for a full hour. No tears, no words, just present in a silence that felt heavy. I made some tea, put the cup in front of her, and sat on the other side of the table, not knowing what to say, because I never learned how to be present in moments when words aren't enough. After a long silence, she said, "Linda and I talked every week. For 40 years, every single week. She knew everything about my life." I replied, "I know, you two were very close." And she added, with a low voice that didn't tremble but was heavy as a stone, "She was the only one who really listened to me." That sentence should have broken me. It should have made me look up and say, "I want to be that person for you too, Marianne. Teach me how." But I thought she was talking about a kind of intimacy that only exists between sisters, a bond I couldn't offer because I wasn't Linda. I didn't think she was telling me, with all the delicacy of someone who has given up on being more direct, that I had never been that person for her over decades, or maybe deep down I knew and I just didn't want to face it. The following years were quiet in a way I came to mistake for peace. We'd go out together sometimes, to the grocery store, to doctor's appointments, to Joel's birthday in Charleston. We talked about what was necessary, and I thought we were a mature couple who had found a serene balance after so many decades together. I convinced myself of it because it was easier than admitting what was really happening. In 2017, Marianne got sick. The diagnosis came on a cold March day, and the news was very serious. She was 73 and chose to fight, with the quiet dignity that was always her trademark. I was there for every appointment, every test, every treatment session. I held her purse, opened the door, asked the doctor the technical questions, wrote down the names of the medications. I was there physically, every step of the way. But even then, I was still confusing presence with attention, confusing doing a task with actually loving someone. One August that year, she was resting at home, with care to keep her as comfortable as possible. I was sitting beside her, holding a newspaper I wasn't really reading, when she slowly opened her eyes and said, in a voice that had grown thin with time, "I tried so hard. I tried so hard to make you listen to me." I lowered the newspaper. I looked at her. I asked, "What do you mean?" She looked at me with a calmness that pierced right through me, from one side to the other, like no words ever could, and she said, I wanted you to listen to me, Robert, that's all." 6 days later she was gone. I was holding her hand. The last words she said to me before closing her eyes for the last time were, "Take care of yourself, not of us, not of Joel, of me." Because even in that final moment, with everything that was between us, she was still thinking of me. And I, who had spent 40 years not hearing what she was trying to tell me, finally heard that, too late to change what was, but in time to understand what I lost. That's what I carry now, at 80 years old in this empty house in Astoria. Not the guilt of someone who did wrong out of malice, because it was never malice. It was distraction. It was arrogance disguised as responsibility. It was believing that providing and being physically present were enough to make a person feel seen, heard, and truly loved. Marianne didn't want more money. She didn't want more comfort. She didn't want me to be different at my job. She wanted me to be there when she spoke, for me to ask how she was and wait for the whole answer, without thinking about something else while she gave it, for me to have genuine curiosity about her life, her thoughts, her feelings. She tried for years, for decades, with stories about her day, with comments about neighbors, with disguised sentences about Vivian and Richard, with the heavy silence after Linda was gone. She tried in every way she knew how, with the patience of someone who still believes the other person will one day turn around and really be there. And I never met her there. Today, when Joel calls, I listen. I really listen. I ask how his wife is, how work is, how he feels about things in his life. Sometimes he hesitates, as if he doesn't quite know what to do with this opening that was never there before. But he answers, and I listen without interrupting, without being somewhere else while he talks. It's late, I know, but it's what I have now, and I do it to honor what Marianne tried to teach me for a lifetime. If you have someone beside you who tries to tell you about their day, about a thought, about any feeling at all, put your phone in your pocket. Turn off the TV. Look at that person. Not to repeat their last words as proof that you were listening, but to really be there in that moment, in that instant that will never come back. Because what you can't get back, when the person you love is still alive and available and trying, is time. And time doesn't tell you when it's running out. I learned that at the cost of everything I lost, and I truly hope that you learn it sooner than I did.